Most leaders send official memos. Ibrahim Traoré sent a letter. Not typed. Not translated. Just one page handwritten in French. Then rewritten in his own English. Full of crossouts and smudges. It wasn't addressed to a foreign minister or a UN envoy. It was mailed directly to Rosh Hamamshala, the Prime Minister of Israel. And it began with 3 simple words. Dear Brother Rosh. No one in his cabinet understood. Why Israel? Why now? It had been a brutal week. Traoré had just returned from Kaya, where villagers were still recovering from a deadly flood. Mothers were sleeping on school floors. Children shared half loaves of bread. And in a dusty hospital tent, a woman named Miriam grabbed his hand and whispered, "The world only hears us when we scream." What about the quiet pain that night? Ibrahim couldn't sleep. He paced the presidential courtyard under the mango trees, asking himself the same question. If silence is where pain lives, maybe that's also where healing begins. And then, around dry A.M., he did something. No speechwriter, no diplomat, no strategist saw coming. He sat down and wrote, I do not write this as a head of state. I write as a son, a father, and a man who has watched his people suffer. I know your nation carries pain, too. Maybe not the same pain, but pain is pain. If you have a single night free, come to Kongusi. No cameras, no guards, no speeches, just you, me, and a fire under the baobab tree. He ended the letter not with sincerely, but with a line that made his chief of staff stare in silence. If your child and mine were friends, what would we do differently? The next morning, the letter was sealed, hand-delivered through trusted diplomatic back channels, and then quietly flown from Ouagadougou to Tel Aviv without even the Israeli embassy knowing what was inside. Back in Burkina Faso, his advisors panicked. This is reckless, said one general. This could embarrass us, warned the foreign minister. There will be no response, said another. But Traoré simply smiled. Sometimes, you don't send a letter to get an answer. You send it because silence is no longer enough. For 5 days, there was nothing. No call. No statement. The press never caught wind of it. Then, on the 6th day, a message came not through formal channels, but as a handwritten note slipped to Burkina Faso's ambassador at a routine embassy lunch in Tel Aviv. It read, one night, one conversation, no expectations. Rosh. Ibrahim held the note in his palm for a long time. For a moment, the world seemed strangely still. No fanfare, no headlines, just a silent agreement between 2 men from 2 different worlds ready to sit under a tree and talk about nothing. And somehow, everything. And so, without warning, without protocol, a private jet was prepped for an unlisted flight to West Africa. A conversation was about to begin, not between nations, between fathers. Prime Minister Rosh Hamamshala was not an impulsive man. He had seen too many letters. Letters from presidents, kings, warlords, each one polished, vetted, and predictable. But this one was different. It had no emblem, no signature in gold, just the faint smell of dust and old paper, and handwriting that didn't try to impress just to be understood. Rosh sat alone in his office at 11:43 a.m., staring at the page. Outside, Jerusalem's city lights blinked like quiet questions in the dark. He read the letter again. No cameras. No guards. No speeches. Just you. Me. And a fire under the baobab tree. He should have laughed. Israel had just finalized a new regional defense pact. His staff was already overwhelmed with crises, both domestic and international. And now what, a fire under a tree in West Africa? He called in his chief of staff. This letter, Rosh said, holding it up. What would happen if I said yes? His chief blinked. Politically, it's unadvisable. Strategically, it's irrelevant. And personally, it could be a trap. Rosh didn't respond. Instead, he opened his bottom drawer and pulled out a worn black and white photo. 2 children, 1 Palestinian, 1 Israeli, both smiling. The photo had been taken at a Red Crescent field hospital 20 years ago. He had visited once, when he was a young junior minister. That same week, both children disappeared. He never found out why or where, only that they were separated for safety. His voice came low. What if I said no? The room went quiet. I think, his chief finally answered, that the world wouldn't notice. But maybe you would. The next morning, Rosh canceled 3 meetings and summoned the National Security Council. I'm taking a personal trip, he announced. It's not a diplomatic visit. No press. No flags. No agenda. Panic rippled through the room. To where? Sir. He lifted the letter. Kongusi. Burkina Faso. Someone coughed. Another whispered. Is that even stable? It is. Rosh said calmly. And if it's not? I'm going anyway. The Mossad director leaned forward. With respect, Prime Minister, we cannot guarantee your safety in that region. You'll be off radar. Off grid, exactly. Rosh cut in. That's the point. He stood. I don't want safety. I want sincerity. For the next 72 hours. The operation unfolded in near total secrecy. Only 5 people knew the truth. A decoy itinerary was leaked to the press. His team said he was taking a short rest in Galilee. Meanwhile, a private Gulfstream jet, unmarked and stripped of insignia, was readied on a private runway. 2 personal security agents. 1 medic. 1 translator. And 1 notebook with nothing written in it. Before boarding, Rosh turned to his aide. If something happens, there's a letter in my desk drawer. Understood. See ya. And one more thing, he added. Cancel the florist. The florist for the annual Holocaust ceremony. This year, we won't lay flowers. We'll lay down silence. The aide said nothing. He simply nodded. That night, the jet lifted off, cutting across the Mediterranean, slicing through clouds with no destination on any official schedule. As the city lights of Jerusalem faded into a blanket of stars, Rosh stared out the window and whispered, let it not be politics. Let it just be 2 men, trying to remember what it means to be human. Burkina Faso awaited. The night air in Kongusi was thick with silence. No red carpet, no security motorcade. Just a dusty road lit by lanterns and a sky full of stars. When Prime Minister Rosh Hamemshala stepped off the plane, the first thing he noticed was the quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that feels ancient. He was driven in an old pickup truck. No flags. No escorts. Just a young driver named Mamadou, who spoke broken English and hummed softly to fill the space. Along the way, Rosh passed mud homes, sleeping goats, and children curled beneath mosquito nets. There were no signs of protest, no signs of welcome, only life continuing, untouched by headlines. When they arrived at the meeting place, there was no building, just a massive baobab tree, standing in the center of a clearing, its trunk wide enough to fit a room inside. A small fire crackled beneath it. And there, sitting on a low wooden stool, was Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't rise. He didn't smile. He simply looked up and said, "You came." Rosh nodded, slowly stepping forward. "You wrote." And then, for a full minute, they said nothing. Just two men. No podiums. No cameras. No agenda. Traoré handed him a cup of ginger tea. Thick and burning hot. Rosh took it, unsure whether to sip or speak first. It didn't matter. Traoré broke the silence. "A woman in Kaya told me the world only hears us when we scream. But she wondered if anyone would listen when we whisper." Rosh stared into the fire. "I know that silence. We wear suits, give speeches, and yet, inside, there's a part of us still screaming." Traoré leaned forward. "I didn't invite you here to debate. I invited you here because I don't think we remember how to feel anymore. Not in public. Not in power." There was a long pause. And then Rosh said something he hadn't said in years. "When I was 12, I met a Palestinian boy. We shared an orange soda. That was it. We didn't talk about land, or fences, or fear. Just soda." Traoré looked over. Intrigued. "What happened to him?" Rosh's voice dropped. "The next day, he was gone. His uncle moved him. Said it wasn't safe to be seen with me. We were kids. But we carried the decisions of adults on our shoulders." Traoré nodded slowly. "I lost a friend that way too. His name was Karim. One day, his father told him not to talk to the boy in the uniform anymore. That was me." They both fell silent again. This time, it wasn't awkward. It was sacred. The fire popped, sending a small spark into the night air. Then Traoré asked the question he'd written in the letter: "If your child and mine were friends, what would we do differently?" Rosh didn't answer at first. He simply opened the blank notebook in his lap and began to write. One word, then another. Then he looked up. "We'd speak softer. We'd listen more. And we'd build less walls in our minds. And on our maps." Traoré smiled faintly for the first time. "That's why I brought you here. Not to fix history, but to imagine a future where silence isn't fear, it's peace. No photographers. No applause. Just two fathers. By a fire. Beneath a tree. And for the first time in a very long time, they weren't politicians. They were just men." The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the earth. The air had shifted. Not colder. Not warmer, just heavier. Like the past had finally taken a seat at the circle. Prime Minister Rosh leaned back against the baobab trunk, his hands clasped around the notebook on his lap. Traoré sat cross-legged across from him, arms resting on his knees, eyes focused but calm. Then came a question, soft but sharp. "What broke your heart before politics?" Traoré asked. Rosh exhaled slowly. Her name was Leora. She was 9. An Israeli girl from a town near the border. The kind that picked wildflowers and collected bottle caps like treasures. He paused. She got caught in the crossfire. Wrong place. Wrong hour. She didn't make it. Traoré voice dropped. I'm sorry. Rosh nodded. What tore me apart wasn't just her death. It was what happened at the hospital. There was a Palestinian boy there too, same age. Injured. Scared. They put them in beds next to each other. And for 2 hours, they played with a small plastic giraffe someone left behind. He glanced up. No hate. New questions. Just 2 kids. Broken but still smiling. And then Traoré asked. Security pulled them apart. Parents objected. Nurses separated them. The giraffe was taken away. Too symbolic. They said. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was blistering. Then Traoré spoke. There was a boy in Burkina Faso named Issoufou, son of a farmer. Bright eyes. Always barefoot. Always laughing. He once built a radio from scrap wire and a broken fan. Rosh leaned in. Listening. One day, his village ran out of medicine. A preventable infection took him in 3 days. His mother asked the government for help. The file never got processed. I was a captain in the army then. I only found out when we buried him. He clenched his jaw. I told myself it was someone else's responsibility. That's the lie we tell ourselves to sleep. Rosh nodded. The bureaucracy of indifference. Exactly. Traoré said. But I don't want to rule over systems anymore. I want to restore the soul inside them. The fire cracked again. Louder this time. As if to punctuate the moment. Then Rosh asked. Cautiously. What if we did something not to prove a point? Not to please a headline, but just because it's right. Traoré tilted his head. What are you thinking? Rosh flipped open his notebook and showed Traoré a sketch 2 figures sitting beneath a tree. One in uniform. One in civilian clothes. No faces. Just posture. Just presence. A place. Rosh said. For children from conflict zones to meet. No press. No preaching. Just play. Maybe one in Burkina Faso. One in Israel. Traoré looked at the drawing. Then back at the fire. Let them build the bridge. We adults were too afraid to cross. Neither of them stood to shake hands. Neither signed a document. Instead, Traoré took a stick, bent forward, and drew a circle in the dirt. Rosh understood immediately. We start here, he said. With nothing. Traoré nodded. Nothing but intention. The wind picked up, rustling the branches above. Somewhere nearby, a hyena howled. But it didn't break the moment. 2 stories. 2 children. 2 nations separated by miles and history. But in that dirt circle, something invisible was born. Not a treaty. Not a promise. A possibility. By morning, the fire had died down to a faint glow, and the sky above Kongusi was tinged with gold. Birds stirred in the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. Prime Minister Rosh Hamamshala stood, brushing red dust from his trousers. Traoré offered him a wooden walking stick, carved at the top with the shape of a dove. Rosh hesitated before taking it. This isn't a gift, Traoré said, quietly. It's a reminder. Rosh smiled. Of what? Of the conversation that doesn't end when the plane takes off. There was no departure ceremony. No journalist. No farewell wave. Just a firm nod. And silence. The jet lifted off an hour later, with no mention in international papers. But the moment didn't vanish, it echoed quietly. Underground. In the places where real change often begins, 3 weeks later. Without a press release or diplomatic announcement. A team of Israeli pediatric surgeons arrived in Burkina Faso, disguised as part of a medical NGO. They brought supplies, training materials, and portable surgical equipment. They set up quietly in Kongusi. No logos. No politics. Just healing. A young girl named Aicha, born with a heart defect, was the first patient. She survived, and when her mother asked who the doctors were, a nurse simply smiled and said, "Friends from far away." Meanwhile, back in Ouagadougou, Traoré personally funded a pilot program for rural students. He called it the Horizon Scholarship, and its only eligibility requirement was curiosity. Not grades, not status, just the desire to ask questions. 2 of the first 5 recipients, Jewish high schoolers from a cultural exchange initiative based in Tel Aviv. The Ministry of Information didn't know how to explain it. There was no formal relationship between the 2 countries. No bilateral agreements. Yet things were happening. And that unsettled people inside the Knesset. One opposition member stood during a closed-door session and demanded an explanation. Why are Israeli doctors flying to West Africa without authorization? Why are students from Burkina Faso invited into our academic institutions? Rosh didn't raise his voice. He just pulled out the notebook he'd taken to Kongusi and read one line. What if the greatest diplomatic breakthrough isn't a headline, but a heartbeat restored? No one responded. Because how do you argue with something that doesn't want credit? But the silence in the room said everything. Across social media, rumors began to swirl. Someone leaked a blurry photo of Rosh and Traoré sitting under the baobab tree. It went viral not because of the identities, but because of the absence of everything else. No security. No statements. Just 2 men and a fire. The image was reshared with the caption, "Conversations, not declarations." Within weeks, it became a quiet global movement. Schools in Brazil adopted it as a theme for conflict resolution. College debate clubs in Sweden used it as a case study. A cafe in Belgium renamed itself the Baobab Table. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré was asked by a local reporter if he considered the meeting a success. He didn't answer right away. Then he simply said, "Success is a word politicians use. I prefer seeds. We planted one." And in Israel, when asked the same question during a press scrum, Rosh gave a rare smile and replied, "If a child who doesn't speak my language can one day call a child from Kongusi their best friend, then yes. That's success." There were no signatures, no treaties, only quiet ripples in places the cameras never look. And sometimes, that's where the real revolution begins. It started with a photograph. Blurry, unstaged, taken from a phone belonging to a volunteer aid worker who didn't realize what they were capturing at the time. 2 men beneath a baobab tree. One wore a plain shirt. The other, a light jacket. No flags. No symbols. Just posture and stillness. The caption was simple. "I don't know who they are, but something about this felt important." Within 24 hours, the image spread like wildfire. Social media erupted with speculation. Reddit threads analyzed the curve of the jawline. Twitter zoomed in on a hand gesture. TikTokers layered lo-fi music over the image and whispered, "This is what diplomacy should look like." Within a week, Journalists began chasing ghosts. Neither government released a statement. When pressed, a spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office replied, "The Prime Minister was on a personal retreat. No further comment." And from Burkina Faso, nothing. That only made the photo more powerful. News anchors across Europe debated its meaning. Editorials questioned if this marked the rise of a new kind of statesmanship. Some were cynical, others hopeful, but none could deny something had shifted. Then came the second surprise. A small foundation based in Stockholm released a list of nominees for its annual Peace Through Action Award. Normally dominated by international organizations and global charities, this year's shortlist included something no one expected: an anonymous effort between two national leaders to build trust without treaties. It was obvious who they meant. Still, neither leader stepped forward. But the silence began to speak louder than words. In Ghana, students held a discussion circle under a mango tree and called it the Baobab Session. In Portugal, a university launched a podcast titled Conversations Not Declarations. Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, a quiet but heated debate boiled behind closed doors. Hardliners in the government were growing uncomfortable. We don't know what was discussed. We don't know what commitments were made. This kind of informal contact bypasses all traditional oversight. Roche sat in the meeting and listened. Then he asked one question: "Would you rather I bring cameras and say nothing, or leave the cameras behind and say everything that matters?" Silence. No one responded. Because deep down, they all knew if you make a deal behind closed doors, people scream about transparency. But if you make no deal and just choose to listen, people panic even more. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré faced pressure of his own. A few foreign diplomats had begun requesting clarity on his country's new direction. "Are you aligning with Israel? Is this symbolic? Will you speak on the record?" He didn't flinch. No alignment. No statement. Just presence. That's all we offered. And it was enough. Still, even without confirmation, things were changing. In Kongusi, the local school began teaching Hebrew phrases alongside French and Mouret. In Jerusalem, a small community center began offering cultural seminars about West Africa. None of it made headlines, but it made history. And while critics scrambled to label what happened, some calling it naive, others calling it dangerous, there was one undeniable truth: the world was reacting to something it couldn't explain. And that is what terrified and inspired people most, because when diplomacy becomes invisible, when action doesn't need applause, when two leaders walk away with no press conference, no handshake, no staged smiles, something more than politics is at work. It's trust. A year passed. No treaties were signed. No official visit was scheduled. No photo ops. No parades. No formal alliance. But somehow everything had changed. In a dusty classroom in Kongusi, a little girl named Hawa stood up during reading hour and recited the Hebrew alphabet with confidence. Her teacher smiled and said, "Very good." The rest of the students clapped, not because they understood every letter, but because they saw courage. In Jerusalem, a boy named Eli wrote an essay about Burkina Faso for a school competition titled Unknown Friends. His opening sentence read, "I don't know what President Traoré sounds like, but I know what he stands for." The essay won first place. And still neither leader had spoken a single public word about that night under the baobab tree. But the echoes were everywhere. A university in Toronto launched a research center titled The future of soft dialogue. Inspired by the now iconic image of the two men by the fire, the center's motto "Begin where no one is listening." Meanwhile, an anonymous donation helped build a medical outpost near Kaya, where two volunteer doctors, one Israeli, on Burkinabe worked side by side. No nameplates, no political banners, just a chalkboard in the lobby that read, "This clinic stands on a conversation." One day, during a quiet press briefing in Tel Aviv, a reporter finally asked Rosh directly, "Do you deny that you met President Ibrahim Traoré in Kongusi?" He paused, took a sip of water, then smiled faintly. "I don't deny silence. Sometimes it speaks louder than memory." No further questions were asked. In Ouagadougou, Traoré attended a youth conference. During the Q&A, a 13-year-old boy asked, "Sir, what was the most important meeting of your presidency?" Traoré didn't blink. He simply replied, "The one that taught me listening is harder than leading." Then he stepped away from the mic. No applause followed. Just a respectful hush, as if the whole room understood they'd been handed something rare, something sacred. One evening, an international radio program aired a story about the rumored encounter. They played music from both regions, read excerpts from the leaked notebook sketches, and ended with this: "Perhaps the next generation won't remember the details, but they'll feel the result in the way their hands reach out without fear." That same night, Rosh sat alone in his study. On his desk was a small wooden sculpture of a baobab tree. At its base, carved with care, was one word in bold letters: intent. He picked it up, turned it in his hand, and whispered, "That's all we ever needed." Far across the ocean, Traoré walked the outskirts of Kongusi in silence. He paused under the now famous tree. The fire pit was cold, but the ground remembered. He placed a stone there not to mark the past, but to anchor the future. And then, for the first time in months, he pulled out a phone and posted a single photo, a child's drawing of two people under a tree, holding hands. No caption, no hashtags. But within minutes, the image was shared across the globe. People knew, and in that knowing, something invisible had rooted itself into the ground of history. Not through speeches, not through deals, but through the radical act of showing up. And somehow, that was enough.